first time I've ever done this in public.
You do it for the rest of your life.
Well, welcome. My name is Dennis, and I'm honored to serve as the worship associate for this service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County, also known as Uufcc. You are welcome here, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter your background. You are welcome here to join us as we proclaim worth in our spiritual journeys. You are welcome here to join us as we share songs that uplift our very beings, and you are welcome to join us in community as we learn, live, and love together. As you have heard, we start our service each week by singing an invitation to gather together, even as we are scattered in many different places. And whether our sacred space be virtual or live, we are glad that you've decided to spend time with us. I wish to express gratitude to the folks that are helping us with it. Well, they're more than helping. They are taking care of the technology this morning, Corey and Tom, and Bobby and the building and grounds team, and all the others who care for our sacred home. We are also grateful for Jim B., our music director, and Linda, and the members of the UUC Quarantine Choir. And they will be providing the recorded music. Finally, I wish to thank the membership committee and their team of greeters and our hospitality committee and John L. for preparing the coffee and snacks that we will enjoy following the service. This service is being broadcast live on YouTube. Consequently, to protect folks' privacy, it is our practice to use first names and, when necessary, last initials. The YouTube recording will also be available on the UUFCC YouTube channel after the service. I'd also would like to remind you of a couple simple procedures that will help our service run smoothly. Please silence your phone. And I'm going to do that right now. When the service is over, please exit through the front door. And for those who need a smooth surface to exit the building, feel free to use the double doors in the lobby. We will gather on the patio for our social time, but if you must keep a certain distance to be unmasked. Please remember to practice appropriate social distancing. Coffee and snacks will be served by our weekly volunteers, and you can sign up on the bulletin board in the social hall to help out following future services. If you are new here, please stand in body or spirit or wave and tell us your first name and where you're from. If you've not already, please speak with the members of the membership committee following the service. Is there anyone here for the first time? Yes, what is your name, please? Kathy? And you are? Alicia. Welcome. If you are viewing this service on YouTube and are unfamiliar with the fellowship but would like to learn more, email our administrator, Mary Jane, at office@uufcc.org, or visit our website at uufcc.org. And wherever you are, we're glad you have chosen to spend your time with us. We will now open this sacred space by turning our attention to the chalice. I have chosen words from the book Lifting Our Voices, Readings in the Living Tradition, and these words were written by Deborah Falk. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each one of us. And now, as Laurie lights our chalice here in the sanctuary, please join me in reciting our affirmation. Shortly, there will be time to light your chalices at home. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you now to light your home chalices or candles. Our first hymn is number 168 in the gray hymnal, and it'll be led by the Uufcc Summer Singers, and it's entitled One More Step.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
Our opening words are in the form of a prayer by Clyde Grubbs. Source of life, we have been given time to measure our days. What are we to make of these times in which we live and love and have our being? The road of history has been long, full of both hope and disappointments. There have been wars and rumors of wars, violence and exploitation, hunger and homelessness and destruction. We know we cannot continue to live in the old way. We must make a change, seek a new way, a way leading towards peace with justice and a healthy planet. Creative Spirit, you have given a vision for the good, and we yearn for a new way. But where are we to find the courage to begin this work for this new beginning? We wonder what is required of us. We think of prophets, women and men who gave their voice to unpopular opinion, who made personal sacrifices, sometimes their lives, for the sake of justice. May we be inspired and renewed by the courage of these witnesses. Let them empower us as we work for this vision. So may it be. Amen. We have a long tradition at UUFCC of sharing our joys and sorrows and life milestones by entering them in our red book. It's called the Book of Life. These messages can be written in the red book. These messages can be written in the red book, which you can find at the back of the sanctuary. Stephen, will you please bring up the book? Thank you. Those at home are welcome to email their entries to the Book of Life at bookoflifeuufcc.org. The messages should be sent no later than the Saturday prior to the service. All entries will be read by the worship associate during the Sunday morning service. After that, email messages will be entered into the actual red book. After I have completed reading, we will enter into a moment of silence, followed by our hymn, Spirit of Life. I don't see any entries in the book today, but I did get several via email. This first one is from Janet Morell, our pianist. And I understand since I received this email, things have gotten worse. On Monday, my 94-and-a-half-year-old mother fell and broke her left humerus. She unfortunately is still recovering from her fall late January when she broke her right humerus. As she told us, she is really struggling to care of herself with two broken wings. But she is my stepfather's caregiver who has dementia. My family in PA is looking into having them move temporarily out of their independent living apartment into a personal care section of the facility. I am waiting patiently to be summoned home by my mom to take my turn. I would appreciate any positive healing thoughts and vibes for my mom, Hazel. I am so blessed to still have her in my life, and I am truly grateful. The second one is from Linda. I am having my surgery on Monday as an outpatient procedure. I will be out of commission for at least 2 weeks, having to use a walker and not bearing weight on my left leg. I start PT at Cora near the UU on August 2nd, and should be interesting. Frank will have a lot to do to care for me. Also, one of my sisters passed after a long illness on June 27th. Her name is Debbie Sosa. She was 64 years old, living in New Jersey, and due to the pandemic, I only saw her once, but we shared our love for cats. So this may be the first surgery. Have to see how my SI joint is after they fix my labral tear and reshape my femur. I may be in for a fusion before the end of this. We'll see. May we hold these and our unspoken joys and sorrows in our hearts. May we also hold one another in love and tenderness so that this fellowship may be a source of strength and comfort, courage, and hope in the days and weeks ahead. And now we will experience a full moment or two of silence for prayer or meditation, and this will be followed by the musical prayer, Spirit of Life. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this morning, Joseph Fenty. Joseph has been a member of UUFCC since 2012. He introduced this congregation to chalice circles, and I was lucky enough to be in that first one. He is also currently a member of the worship committee, as well as being involved in many other activities here. His title of the sermon is Reproductive Rights, and it'll include a historical perspective.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here today. Second week in a row. First week as the associate, and now I address you as the speaker. And it's really nice to see the audience start to fill in. I'm looking forward to the day where we're back to full strength. So this is very exciting for me. Over the summer, we got a taste of a Supreme Court ruling in the case of that would address Roe v. Wade, which is a law that guaranteed the right of women to an abortion. And there was a leaked opinion by Justice Alito, and it gave us a window into his thinking and the window of the court on this particular topic. And I was very fascinated by it, and I did some research about reproductive rights in the United States and the laws that sort of define what women can and cannot do with their bodies. So I think the central questions of the day for me would be, should the state have the power to control a woman's body once she becomes pregnant? Very important. Are reproductive rights inalienable rights, which are rights that cannot be transferred without consent of the person possessing those rights? How has patriarchy and religion been used to objectify women and deny women their autonomy and agency? And what can we do to mitigate the damage to women and their families? These are the questions that occurred to me. I'm sure you have your own questions on these topics as well. So let's do a little bit of a dive into what are the factors, what are the things that lead us to where we are today. And this is my perspective. I'm sure you have yours, and it'd be nice to have a conversation after the talk today and share different ideas about why we are in the place that we are today. So social conservatives, political and religious leaders have defined the rights of women for millennia. Historically, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have relegated women to the property of fathers and husbands and severely limited their natural rights. The scriptures record polygamy, forced birth, abortions, forced marriage to rapists, birth pains for the original sin, repression of sexuality and forced chastity, obedience to husbands, forced silence in the church, strict dress codes, and death sentence for witches, believe it or not. Such teachings prompted 19th century feminist Elizabeth Cady Stanton to write, "The Bible and the church has been the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of women's emancipation." In recent years, evangelical and Christian nationalists have used their understanding of Scripture to suppress women's rights and LGBTQ rights. They support politicians at the local and national level that are anti-choice and pro-forced pregnancy, anti-marriage equality, and anti-civil rights protections. The evangelical bloc has played a big part in electing presidents, congressional representatives, and local officials. Presidents George H. Bush, George W. Bush, and Trump have installed, with the help of Mitch McConnell, a cabal of radical judges who, under the cloak of originalism, have gutted reproductive rights of women. The rights of women are defined by law and legal interpretation. Let's consider how these rights have changed in the U.S. over time. In the early 18th century, women in the colonies had open access to reproductive planning, including the use of contraceptives, what they could use at the time, and other forms of birth control, as well as access to legal abortions. In 1821, a law was enacted in Connecticut that targeted apothecaries, pharmacies, who sold quote-unquote poisons to women for the purpose of inducing an abortion. In 1827, Illinois enacted a law which was the first in the nation to impose penalties, criminal penalties, in connection with abortion before quickening. Quickening is when the baby starts to have movement in the womb. And in 1867, they passed a bill that made abortion and attempted abortion a criminal offense. In 1829, New York made post-quickening abortions a felony and pre-quickening abortions a misdemeanor. In 1873, Congress passed the Comstock Act, which made it illegal to send any lewd, obscene, or lascivious materials through the mail, including contraceptive devices and information on contraception or abortion or how to obtain them. New England residents lived under the most restrictive laws in the country. In Massachusetts, anyone disseminating contraceptives or information about contraceptives faced stiff fines and imprisonment. By far the most restrictive state of all was Connecticut, where the act of using abortion was even prohibited by law. Married couples could be arrested for using birth control in the privacy of their own bedrooms and subject to a 1-year sentence. Between 1820 and 1900, most contraceptives and abortions were outlawed in the United States. There were at least 4 drivers that created this situation. First, physicians from the American Medical Association led a long and successful campaign against abortion and midwifery. Second, nativists feared that children of arriving immigrants would dominate the country and thereby dilute the Anglo-Saxon majority population. Third, Anthony Stockham, a Christian nationalist, Civil War veteran, and an anti-contraception activist, led a successful federal and local government campaign to criminalize the dissemination of birth control. And finally, the Great Awakening, which was a religious movement, subjugated women by emphasizing the restoration of the nation by a return to puritanical biblical values. And these values legitimated male dominance in politics, the economy, and culture. So those are the 4 forces that I've identified. The stranglehold on women's reproductive rights started to loosen at the beginning of the 20th century. At this time, Margaret Sanger, a birth control activist, sex educator, writer, and nurse, began a campaign to legitimize contraception in the U.S. She opened the first birth control clinic in 1916 and was arrested for distributing family planning materials. Later, Sanger went on to create the American Birth Control League, which evolved into the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Now, a lot of people hold Margaret Sanger as a revered figure, but there is a dark side too. It must be noted that Margaret was an enthusiastic sponsor of the eugenics movement in the U.S. and internationally. Eugenics is, of course, the selective breeding and sterilization of humans to ensure the good genes are passed on. But who gets to determine what good genes are? In Paulo Alonso, in her article, Autonomy Revoked, the forced sterilization of women of color in the 20th century states, throughout history, African Americans have consistently had their reproductive rights abused. Women were especially mistreated and discriminated against by the medical profession. James Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology, practiced many of his surgeries on enslaved women without anesthetics during the 19th century. One woman in particular had 30 surgeries, and he perfected techniques. He felt that black women could endure more pain than white women, and he developed different surgical devices that were used later on, and when he started to operate on white women, he used anesthetics. This is a very interesting piece, and I'll be glad to share it with you, that talks about women of color and reproductive rights. And it wasn't just women of color, but it was poor whites, African Americans, Latinas, and Puerto Ricans that were victims of coerced involuntary genetic sterilization in the United States and Puerto Rico throughout the 20th century, lasting until the late 1970s. Interestingly enough, in Puerto Rico, the number of women who had sterilizations actually inched up into the 1950s and 60s, so that almost 1 out of 5 women in Puerto Rico were sterilized. There's something called the Mississippi Appendectomy. Anyone heard of that? Women would go in for care, and they would find themselves sterilized without their knowledge or consent. There were laws in the United States that allowed departments of health to forcibly sterilize the feeble-minded. And how do you get to be classified as the feeble-minded? Well, you could in fact be mentally ill or not capable of taking care of yourself, or you could fail to answer a number of very strange questions that they would ask you. And if you didn't know the answers to them, then you would be considered feeble, and you could be subject to sterilization. Over 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized in the United States, and Virginia being a very active state in this area. So let's take a look at the 20th and 21st century. So in 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution of the U.S. protects the liberty of married couples to buy and use contraceptives without government restriction. 1965. By a vote of 7-2, the Supreme Court ruled that married couples have the right to marital privacy. That decision established the right to privacy with respect to intimate practices. This and other cases viewed the right of privacy as protected from government intrusion. During the 1960s, several states loosened their absolute restrictions on abortion. For example, surprisingly enough, Mississippi reformed its abortion law and became the first U.S. state to allow abortion in the case of rape. Colorado became the first state to decriminalize abortion in the cases of rape, incest, or in which pregnancy would lead to permanent physical disability of the woman. And similar laws were passed in California, Oregon, and North Carolina. How did women get an abortion before it was legal in America? Let's listen to one woman's story.
I was numb, I was terrified, there was no place to run, there was no place, car ride was silent, I was numb, I was terrified, there was no place to run, there was no place to hide. I didn't know where I was, and even if I had run back and gotten my clothes and run out, what was I then going to do? Not just where was I, but I was not prepared. I was 19. I was not prepared to have a child. My name is Elizabeth Stone, and today I'm going to tell you the story of an abortion I had long before abortions were legal, when I was a 19-year-old college student. Even when I was trying to get a sort of contact, I didn't go around and announce myself. I had friends who spoke about a friend who needed something. And one night, soon before I was going to go home to Brooklyn for Christmas vacation, someone slipped a piece of paper under my dorm door. And it was a phone number. It was a New Jersey phone number, and I never knew who put it under the door, but I knew what it was. I called the phone number, and it was the phone number of a doctor's office in Union, New Jersey. So I went to the doctor's office. He said to me, "Are you pregnant?" I said, "Yes." He examined me. The word abortion was never mentioned. And I knew that I'd been told that I would be receiving a phone call on a payphone the next day to set up an appointment. I had been told that a driver would pick me up, but that if he thought there was any chance of him being followed, he would just drive by. A little dapper man with shiny black shoes and a winter coat got out of, because this was December, got out of the car, came around. I handed him the envelope. He opened the envelope, made sure that everything, that the $500 was in there. He then nodded, opened the car door for me. I got in the back seat of the car. He got in the front seat. In the car already were two other women. Car ride was silent. I didn't know where I was, didn't know where I was going. The driver, after about 10 or 12 minutes, pulled into an indoor parking lot. The day before I went, I had been reading the New York Times, and there was a story in the New York Times about a woman who had been found, her dead body parked in her car, had been found in front of her house. And the story went on to say that she had died during a botched abortion. The first thing I saw was a kitchen table, and every horror story I had heard about abortion sooner or later involved a woman getting an abortion on a kitchen table. A man came out of the door on the right carrying an unconscious, semi-naked woman in his arms. She was like a floppy doll, and she had a tampon string trailing between her legs, and I was horrified. I was horrified that the driver was watching all this. It felt like an enormous violation on top of many violations. He carried the woman across the hall into the second bedroom, and then after a minute or two came out. I didn't know whether she was dead or unconscious. And then he waved us, the man who was wearing blue scrubs, he was wearing a mask. Was he a doctor? You know, I don't really know. He waved us down the hallway, and we went into the bedroom on the right. And that was set up like almost like a barracks. I mean, there were 6 cots, each against the head against the wall. And 3 of the cots were already filled. This was a little bit after 7 o'clock in the morning. And so it meant that the day, the abortion day, started well before dawn. Those women had to have been picked up at around 4 or 5 in the morning. So we were the second round of the day. The room to the right that he had taken the first woman out of, I looked in. He had left the door open as he carried her out. I looked in and I could see an examination table, and on the examination table was the sort of white paper, or maybe it was a sheet that doctors use when they're examining someone, and it was covered in blood. It was it wasn't pools of blood, but it was a big, big blotch of blood. And I then understood that that was where the abortion had taken place. All this I glimpsed in an instant. I then went in, got changed, sort of, and I was not in a hurry to have this happen, but I was so anxious to get it over that I was the first one out of my clothes. And the man in blue scrubs came back and said, "Okay, you're ready." And in the interim, he had put a clean sheet on the examination table, which would then be filled with my blood. I smelled bleach, and the bleach was pink, because that was where he put the bloody towels or sheets or whatever it was. And then he said, "Okay, get on the table, count backwards from 10. I got to about 8, and that is all I remember. The next thing I remember was being in the barracks, in the cot room, coming to. Nobody talked about trauma in those days, but what we do know now about trauma is that traumatic memories remain very, very vivid for a long period of time. This was an abortion I had half a century ago, and I may not remember whether it was a paper sheet or a sheet, but I remember the blotch of blood on it. There is not a woman alive of childbearing age today who remembers what it was like to live at a time before Roe v. Wade. I am someone who wanted to have children. I always knew I wanted to have children. Motherhood has been one of the most powerful experiences of my life. You don't have to have children if you don't want to. I'm not an advocate. You can have children, but I would not have been able to be a good mother as a 19-year-old college dropout. I would like everybody to know what it is, not that we're going to go back to, but we are already going back to. All over the country, there have been erosions of Roe v. Wade. I think there are 3 abortion centers in all of Louisiana, which means somebody somewhere is standing on a street corner in a strange city at 6 o'clock in the morning waiting to go through with this. I do want everybody to be forced to imagine a dead woman behind a steering wheel. And I was a middle-class kid with supportive parents who could help me financially, a good boyfriend, great friends, and I still was in a situation where my sense of my powerlessness was overwhelming.
To have been alive during that period of time. So you may have your own personal experiences, but that just gives you a little insight on what it was like. As an update, abortions are not legal in Louisiana. That's one of those states that has a complete ban. So let's go on to the Roe v. Wade decision. So on January 22nd, 1973, Justice Blackmun delivered the opinion of the Supreme Court in the Roe et al. Versus Wade, District Attorney of Dallas case. In the 7-2 decision, the court held that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution provides a fundamental right to privacy, which protects a pregnant woman's right to an abortion. The court also held that the right to an abortion is not absolute and must be balanced against the government's interest in protecting women's health and prenatal life. The court resolved these competing interests by announcing a pregnancy trimester timetable to govern all abortion regulations in the United States. In 1992, in the case Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court overturned the trimester framework in Roe versus Wade, making it legal for states to prohibit abortion after the point of fetal viability, except in instances that would risk the woman's health. In 2014, in the case Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, the Supreme Court allowed closely held for-profit corporations to be exempt from a law its owners religiously objected to. It was the first time that the Supreme Court found that a closely held corporation could claim a religious belief that would exempt it from certain laws. In June 2022, the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. In that case, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, held that the Constitution does not confer any right to abortion, thus overruling both Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So let's consider this latest Supreme Court case. So ostensibly, Mississippi asked the Supreme Court to rule on the constitutionality of a law that disallowed a woman's ability to have an abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. After Amy Coney Barrett was installed by the court, Mississippi asked the court to take up the question of the constitutionality of Roe v. Wade. The majority of the court held that Roe v. Wade, the precedent for 50 years, was unconstitutional and women did not have a federal right to abortion. Consequently, each state would decide whether abortions will be banned completely or restricted. Writing for the majority, Judge Alito said, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak. The decision has had damaging consequences. And far from bringing about a national settlement of the abortion issue, Roe and Casey inflamed debate and deepened divisions. It's time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. He went on to say that a right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. On the contrary, it is an unbroken tradition of prohibiting abortion on the pain of criminal punishment that persisted from the earliest days of the common law until 1973. Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion, called into question the legal precedent that recognizes the right to privacy embedded in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. He thus put on the chopping block the court's decisions regarding marriage equality, gay sex, access to contraceptives, and other rights which we have taken for granted. Interestingly enough, he did not cite the Loving decision, which says that it was okay to have an interracial marriage. So dissenting in the case, we have Justices Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. They said this about the court majority decision. It says that from the very moment of fertilization, a woman has no right to speak up. A state can force her to bring a pregnancy to term even at steep personal and familial costs. An abortion restriction, the majority holds, is permissible whenever rational, the lowest level of scrutiny known to the law, is put forward. And because the court, as the court has often stated, protecting fetal life is rational, states feel free to enact all manner of restrictions. As of today, there are 15 states that have new or forthcoming laws prohibiting abortion without exception for rape or incest, even though 75% of Americans support legal abortion in such cases, according to the 2018 Gallup poll. The bar for documenting a rape or incest the bar for documenting that rape or incest has occurred is sufficiently high that an effective total ban is fait accompli. So if you can imagine a young girl being a victim of incest, let's say an uncle, there has to be a court report, there has to be a police report that actually happened before her justification for abortion is deemed to be adequate. That's not going to happen. In most cases, that kind of documentation is not available. Lynn, would you read your story? Lynn is going to read a story from a woman who had so you can get a sense of what are the
Can
things.
you hear me? Okay. This is the story of Dana. And I'll give you a little background before I read her story. She refers to Dr. Tiller. And if you'll recall, in 2009, a very famous late-term OBGYN that would do late-term abortions in Kansas. And George Tiller, he was first a victim of, his clinic was bombed in 1993, and he escaped that only to be murdered while coming out of church on a Sunday morning in July 2009 in Wichita, Kansas. So this is Dana's story, written from Colorado in 2009. After Dr. Tiller was killed, I watched the man I didn't know would become my doctor, speaking of his colleague on the news. I rubbed my pregnant belly and wondered how anyone could possibly have a late-term abortion. A month later, I understood. During the 29-week ultrasound, the ventricles in the baby's brain were found to be enlarged. There aren't adjectives to describe how I felt when we learned weeks later that her neurological system hadn't formed. It's not that I didn't want an imperfect child, but even if we had allowed all the intervention, she'd have seizures 70% of the time, never suck, never breathe. My first thought was of my 2-year-old son and the impact this would have on my family. No one at the time presented abortion as an option, and I asked. During the car ride home, I kept saying to my husband, please don't think of me as a bad person. But as far as I knew, only one doctor in the country would perform an abortion that late, even for medical reasons. He just had to approve us. He was in Colorado, we lived in Maryland. I began starting to feel her seize within me, and we flew to Boulder the very next week, paying for everything out of pocket. $17,000 for the procedure and about $3,500 for the last-minute travel cost. They did a sonogram to find her heart and injected her with a long needle. I counted only 4 movements, and she was gone. At 6 in the morning on the day I was to have returned to the clinic, I felt my water break. I was alone in a hotel bathroom so far away from my home. I wanted to protect my husband, and I wouldn't let him in. I delivered her intact, sitting on the toilet, and as I sat there until the doctor and nurse came and took her away properly. It's different for me than for my husband. I carried her. I didn't have relief until the next time when my daughter was born. Now we are have 3 living children and an intact family. That doctor gave me my family.
In June, healthcare providers sued the state of Florida to prevent a 15-week abortion ban from taking effect. It used to be 24 weeks. The state ruled that the law is a violation of the state constitution, and it issued an order blocking the law, but the state appealed the ruling, triggering an automatic stay in that injunction under Florida law. The state is planning to appeal the Florida Supreme Court the state is planning to appeal to the Florida Supreme Court, where DeSantis has appointed 3 of the 7 justices. The ACLU has this to say about the case. Florida's state constitution has an express right of privacy that under decades of Florida Supreme Court precedent provides broad protection for privacy rights, including the right to have an abortion, independent of federal law. Accordingly, even with the Supreme Court decision that eliminated the federal constitutional right to an abortion, House Bill 5, HB 5, is blatantly unconstitutional under Florida's state constitution. This law also defies the clear will of the people of Florida. 2/3 of Floridians already support the right to abortion, and voters have consistently cast their ballot to ensure the state constitution provides independent protection for the right to an abortion. So, That's where we stand. Now, what is the UUA doing in this regard? Well, there was a recent UUA convention, and that's when the news broke. So I'd like to share some words with you from Susan Frederick Gray, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So regarding this decision, she says the following: the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision does not alter the Unitarian Universalist commitment to reproductive justice. Comprehensive reproductive care, including access to abortion, is essential to the health and well-being of individuals and families. And this is an important point. Abortion is very important to women's health care. There are women who are actually miscarriaging as we speak that cannot get the medication needed to resolve their situation because doctors are so afraid of the legal consequences. So going on with the statement, the decision to limit this basic human right means that the fight will shift to state legislatures across the country. Guided by our moral values, we are prepared to be part of that ongoing struggle and continue to show up for reproductive justice in all aspects of public life. Our faith calls us to advocate on the behalf of all those who need access to safe legal abortion care whenever and wherever they need it. We will not rest until the reality is true across the country. I urge lawmakers, elected officials, and leaders in public life across the country to take action for gender and healthcare equity for all. So I'll give you a little flavor of her impromptu speech, and then we'll wrap up. Corey, you load the speech.
Universalist, I'm Susan Frederick Gray. I'm president of the denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association. A lot of us are here at the side with love, gold shirts and stoles. We have been committed to reproductive justice and the right to abortion for decades. And before Roe protected our right to abortion, Unitarian Universalists were partnering with other faith communities to help women access safe abortions. And we are going right back to that work as faith communities. I am furious. I am filled with holy fury at the way that our lives and our rights are being taken away. Women's rights, trans people's lives and health care, BIPOC communities' lives and freedom. We are in this struggle in solidarity. There are more of us than there are of them. And we come together, we will win. There is a Holy Spirit in us, a spirit of courage and power that knows that liberation is only possible when we are free, when every single one of us is free. We cannot be divided in these movements by identity. We have to fight on all the issues because the system of fascism, authoritarianism, Christian ethno-nationalism is coming for us all. And we're not going to take it. And we're not going to be quiet. We will not be silent. We will not give up our rights. We will disobey the law. We will protect each other. Reproductive justice, reproductive care is health care. It is a fundamental human right. It is about liberation. It is about agency. It is about bodily autonomy. Are you ready to fight for one another, to protect each other, to break the law, to make sure that people can get abortion, that anyone who wants or needs an abortion can access it? We are in this struggle together, my siblings. We are in this struggle together. And the spirit of love and the spirit of justice and the spirit that is known by so many names is with us in this struggle. There are more of us than there are of them. We will not be silent. And we will fight for every single one of us. And we will win. And we will not stop fighting until we win. Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. We will be here. We are in this fight. This is a long haul fight for our lives, for human thriving. And we will win it. It is a fight for our planet, for all our workers, for all of us. And we will win, and we will not stop fighting until we win. Thank you, Reverend.
About that speech. That was powerful, wasn't it? It's wonderful that we have leadership that is going to stand up for us and protect our rights. So let's commit ourselves to defeating these laws that endanger women's lives. An attack on bodily autonomy and reproductive rights is an attack on all of us. We stand for justice and freedom, and we will prevail in the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, the summer singers will sing a song called Standing Before Us.
These are the women who throughout the decades have led us and helped us to know where we have come from and where we are going. The women who's helped us to grow. Standing before us, making us strong, lending their wisdom to help us along, sharing our vision, sharing a dream, touching our thoughts, touching our lives like a deep flowing stream. These are the women who join in the struggle, angry and gentle and wise. These are the women who hold us to action and hold us to open our eyes. Standing before us, making us strong, nurtured our spirits, the ones on whom we depend. These are the women who gave us the courage, our mentors, our sisters, our friends, standing before us, making us strong, lending their wisdom to help us along, sharing a vision, sharing a dream, touching our thoughts, touching our lives like a deep flowing stream. These are a few of the women who led us. We know there is many more. We know are those who went down before, standing before us, making us strong, lending their wisdom to help us along, sharing our vision, sharing a dream, touching our thoughts, touching our lives like a deep flowing
In our tradition, congregations exist because of the generous support of members and friends. It is our privilege and our responsibility to ensure the health and future of this fellowship. To this end, your offerings to support the ministry of this fellowship, whether by pledge or donation, may be offered online. There are several ways that you can give. You can drop your donation in the basket that will soon be passed. You can mail checks to the office, drop them in our mailbox, or call the office to make other arrangements. We are also equipped to accept donations through the Venmo app. Payments through this app should be made to Uufcc offering. You can also have your bank automatically send a check to the fellowship each month. Your generosity is always appreciated. And if you are with us for the first time, do not feel obligated to give. Your presence is enough. And now we will listen as the offering is taken to a pre-recorded piano by Jim B. The title is A Clarinet Dream. Now it's time to highlight UUFCC's special events and activities. Please remember to check your weekly updates, which include a calendar and links for connecting via Zoom or in person. Additionally, go online and read our monthly newsletter. It has all kinds of good information and interesting letters. Following the service today at 11:45, there'll be a PFLAG interest group. PFLAG is an acronym that stands for Parents and Families Together for Supporting Lesbians and Gay and Transsexual Youth. On Monday, there's Spanish for Beginners at 4 with Herb. And the Policy and Procedures group will meet on Wednesday, the 27th at 10. And then also on Wednesday at 7 p.m., it's Happy Hour with John Lee. And this is on Zoom, so you would need to use the universal link. And then Thursday, there's a Buddhist meditation and then discussion. And that's here. Let's see. Oh, there's a UU curriculum called Facing Death with Life. We own a copy of it and started Reverend Amy and 2 other folks started teaching it several years ago, and there was a high interest in it. We have the curriculum. It's a UUA curriculum, and we really would like to offer that class again, but we're looking for teachers. So if you are interested in getting involved in presenting this, let me know. Let's see. We always need folks to make coffee so we can have our little hit after the service. So if you're interested in volunteering to make coffee or set up snacks, there's a sheet on the bulletin board that you can sign up. And the Summer Singers are meeting on Wednesday nights at 6:30 for rehearsal, and anyone that would like to join us is certainly welcome. And I think that's all I have for this morning. The benediction was written by Frederick Douglass. It's called The Limits of Tyrants. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning, and they want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. The struggle may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed on them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those they oppress. And now, as Laurie extinguishes the chalice, remember that the light of hope and the fire of commitment and the warmth of community will sustain and nurture you until we meet again. May it be so. And now the Summer Singers will lead us in hymn 1057 in the Teal Book, Go Lift It Up.
Moonlight, starlight, guide your journey into peace and the brightness of
Please join us on the patio for refreshments.